Welcome to BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. We have a really fun show for you today, at least in my opinion, because this is what I've been working on for basically the last week and a half. Since I got back from vacation, I've been chronicling the top players at each position and ranking them in order. The power ranking of the Penn State offense. We are talking about 5 through 1 coming up on today's show. Also at 10:30, Greg Pickel is going to be stopping by from Indianapolis to give us a recap of what he heard yesterday from athletic director Pat Kraft, and of course, give us a preview of what he's expecting to hear from James Franklin and the Penn State contingency at Indianapolis for Big Ten Media Days, which happens today. You can get all of those videos here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel when they come up. So when James Franklin speaks, we will have that for you shortly afterwards here and at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Greg already has his articles, his takeaways, and his thoughts over at the site right now, which you can read for just $1. Sign up right now. Code PSU1, 2 months for $1. Big Ten Media Days are here. Training camp is next week. We're going to have Penn State Media Day soon, and then training camp updates. You need to get in to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for the 2024 season. There's so much different. There's so much new. You can't rely on some of your old standbys, your old adages, your old thoughts, and your ways of looking at things because they're playing the Pac-12 now. I mean, it's the Big Ten, but they're playing the Pac-12. So what does all of that mean? You can check that out at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Again, just $1 for 2 months of access to see if you like it, or you can just go all in right now, sign up, and you'll get a year's subscription, and I promise you, it is well worth your money. So we're going 5 through 1 in the Penn State offensive positional rankings, and of course, we'll do defense over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com starting today and working through that to number 1 coming up, probably ending right around this time next week. But here's the thing. We all know who's number 1 on this list. We all know who's number 5 on this list. There's very little doubt. And if you did have any doubt, it's over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You can read all of those articles. They're all out. The headlines are out there. You know who it is, so you can go check it out and read the full thing. I'm going to do my best to put all the links in the description of the video so you don't even have to go that far. But here's number 5.
Number 5.
Is anyone surprised that the wide receivers are number 5 on this list? I did not think so. Penn State wide receivers have been the whipping boy. They've been under the spotlight all offseason as the group that needs to prove the most. Everyone's been trying to replace them, either with transfer portal players or 5-star talent from the recruiting class. Who do you need to know? The players that are part of the conversation. That's what I went through of like, here's what they lost last year. Dante Cephas and Keandre Lambert-Smith, the majority of the targets in the offense. A dominant number of targets, especially from Lambert-Smith, who was the number 1 receiver from a volume perspective throughout the entire season. They come into this year without those guys and with only really adding Julian Fleming through the transfer portal. So, you know, we're going to start with the positives here, and then we'll get to the obvious downsides. But that's just kind of a quick overview of where this position is heading into training camp. But here's the good news. And Andy Kotelnicki is going to come up a lot. We talked about him yesterday on the show as well. Kansas, in the passing game, we talk a lot about their running game, their running scheme, some of the unique things they do from a format perspective of how the offense operates, right? The kind of helter-skelter, ADHD movement pre-snap that seems like chaos, but is actually organized and for a reason. What does that generate in the passing game? Here's the bottom line. Penn State's receivers versus Kansas's receivers on open targets. That doesn't matter how they got open. How did they do when the receivers were open? Well, Kansas gained 2,000 yards on 52 explosive plays. Penn State, just under that at 1,935 yards on 43 explosive plays. So they were less efficient and they were less effective overall from a numbers perspective, pure number of explosive plays, all of those things. And those might seem close. You might be like, what's the difference here? The difference is Penn State threw the ball 100 more times on top of that too. So they got there through an absolute barrage of plays last year. Penn State's 13-play methodical drives, sprinkling in some explosive plays. They held on to the ball against, average teams and just bled the clock a lot. So while we can't account for how the receivers got open in this look at the offensive comparisons, whether it was the defense was bad and out of position, a receiver ran a basic route but got open because they're awesome at running routes, or were they schemed open? But when you're looking at a big picture like that, I don't know that it matters. If you're getting open and getting explosive plays consistently at that level, Kansas has good offensive skill players, but Penn State should be comparable in that area. So this offense should be better from a receiver position based on what they're going to do this year as opposed to what they did last year, and not funneling all the targets to one position and one player. I think they're going to be more diverse in who they throw the football to, who gets open. Trey Wallace has to lead this group. That has to be true. But there can be guys that have roles on offense that are not so absolutely narrow. That's why I'm optimistic. And if we had a number 6 on this list and it was the receivers from 2023, then it would be 5 receivers from 2024. There should be an improvement from this group. And I know that people are wondering, who are the other names? Do you count on Peter Gonzalez, Tyser Denmark, some of the other younger players? And to me, that's why this group is number 5. Because I would say, if you're counting your ifs and you start filling up one hand with ifs that have to happen for something to work out well in your favor in football, you're in trouble. If Omari Evans becomes a viable threat, they have an incredibly balanced and dangerous offense. If Julian Fleming operates as the player we expect from him in this offense, I think that's a pretty sound if. He's going to be a certain level of consistent, which Penn State needs. If Trey Wallace stays healthy, big one, big if. If Caden Saunders takes a step, if Tyser Denmark is a part of the conversation, if Peter Gonzalez is a part of the conversation, if one of the guys we haven't mentioned yet, the light comes on for them. But there are significant ifs about this lineup that we don't know yet. We don't know how these players are going to work together. I told you about a week ago in one of our shows, what are we looking for from this group, from how all the puzzle pieces fit together. I think that's a really important part of what this offense is able to do with these receivers. So if you've got any comments or you want to throw anything into the chat, we're open for business today to have a conversation about those things. But as always, as I said yesterday, when we're having that conversation and I stop talking on air, there's an alarm bell that goes off in my head. So if I'm just reading for a second, I'm trying to make sure that what you're saying is appropriate for us to put on the show. So let's get into number 4. That wide receiver, I think we've talked about them so much that we don't need to spend a ton of time there. There's some more interesting positions and there's some more interesting things that I want to get to with 4 through 1. And I tend to talk a lot, and we need to have time to talk to Greg. So we're going to get all of this done in an hour. But if you have any thoughts, you want to get your thoughts on the show, let me know. And also, while we're here, like the video, share with your friends. It's a Wednesday morning in the sleepiest part of the schedule. Let people know, hey, wake up. I always hate it when people knock on the mic. I don't know why I did that. But hey, let people know we're here doing the show live.
Number 4.
So, number 4, I had a hard time with this because I had a couple positions in mind. I'm very optimistic about where this position is going, but the evidence and the turnover on the offensive line says that they've got to come in number 4. So if we're looking at guaranteed production, we're looking at transition. I think this, you have to consider them number 4 with a really high upside, the ability to far outplay being the second worst, if you want to look at it that way, unit on the offense. Because, again, Andy Kotelnicki can do a lot of things for this group. And they also have a lot of talent. But let's get down to why they're number 4. I think it's pretty obvious. Here is the 2 deep from last year. Olufashinu, Drew Shelton, Vega Ioane, JB Nelson, Hunter Norzad, Nick Dawkins, Sal Wormley basically took every rep at right guard, Caden Wallace, Drew Shelton. That is the rundown from last season with the 2 deep. So it's not just that they're losing 3 starters, it's that the depth is changing too. Now those go hand in hand, but not always. Sometimes you have familiar depth guys that maybe aren't going to be the starter, but are absolutely a Bryce Effner, an absolutely critical depth piece that is sticking around and provides stability through a transition at a position. And this year, it's very different. Javen Williams enters the starting lineup as one of the two deep players. Drew Shelton, Vega Ioane, JB Nelson is the one position of stability with Sal Wormley at guard. But Nick Dawkins is taking a step into a starter role. Cooper Cousins, a true freshman, is going to be counted on as one of the players at a key swing position on the interior, one of the main pieces of depth on the inside. If you consider JB Nelson and Vega Ioane as like co-starters. I don't remember the last time I've seen JB Nelson playing right guard. I could be wrong about that. I should double check that. But primarily, those guys have stayed on the left side. Vega's bounced between right and left. But if you're looking to stabilize the left side of the offensive line and JB Nelson's your swing position player, it's really important that they have that kind of left side locked down. And just to throw this up here again, the right tackle depth, Anthony Donko, at this time last year, was a left guard. Not only at this time last year, in November of last year, Anthony Donko was a left guard. Now he's the presumed starting right tackle, and Nolan Rucci comes into the program as a transfer player as that pushing for playing time right tackle. So there's some positives there. The talent there, you really should like. Anthony Donko is a guy that people are raving about, giving him the next Olu Fashanu comparisons from his abilities, his size, his advanced play, and I'd say even for his age, because again, remember, he is a redshirt freshman. So this offensive line has some talent, and they have some ability, but you're relying on some really young players to do that. And then, of course, we covered the conversation about left tackle with Drew Shelton yesterday of that's a big wild card, but at the same time, I have to think that Penn State has not been preparing him for 2 straight years for it to completely fail. So since he arrived on campus as a freshman, he's had to play. Penn State views him as a starter. They got him work at right and left tackle last year. A lot of work that they could get him. He was injured, so it didn't look good, but he still got all that experience. So what is that worth? It's got to be worth more than nothing. I can't start him out as this is a total wild card. So you should feel reasonably good about that, and we know generally going into training camp what we expect out of the starter rotation. I don't think that there will be competitions. Penn State always maintains that there's going to be competition. Nobody's guaranteed a starting spot. Coming into camp, though, Nick Dawkins had a pretty strong lead on that center position from what we understand. There has been no question that Shelton is the left tackle, and then Anthony Donko has been ahead in the situation with Nolan Rucci at right tackle, but those are, I guess, technically open positions. Anybody can win them, but the way things are playing out, we seem to know who the starting 5 are, and then, 6, 7, and 8 will push for as many snaps as they can get. So, number 4 on the offensive line, I think the fact that I'm very high in Vega Ioane and Anthony Donko has the profile that he does make this particular unit, along with the offensive style, I think this makes them, they could be number 2 by the end of the season if a lot of things, again, with those ifs, if a lot of the things that we're talking about, if they work out. So the scheme will help with the running game. They don't have to be perfect on every play, and that's what we go into with the article over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is how Andy Kotelnicki's scheme lightens the box from a numbers perspective and makes things easier from an angle perspective of getting to certain blocks. But make no mistake, they have to execute those blocks. There's no amount of scheme and technique and subterfuge that can make you a better blocker from your particular skills. It can give you a better situation. It can't make you block a 330-pound Mason Graham if he were on the schedule. Just the name that popped into my head. Or whoever Ohio State's rolling out this year. It can't make you block those guys more proficiently on an individual level, but the hope is it puts you in a position where you don't have to be perfect on every single play. They can hide some deficiencies in the passing game if they have those up front. So the scheme, by design, gives the offense and the offensive line help, as opposed to, hey, we're running inside zone, come stop us. every offense has to have some of that, but you don't have to have all of that on every single play. So there is that particular conversation of things will be easier for this group up front. So that's 5 and 4. Now we get into the conversation that I think everyone has had and has argued about. What do you do with quarterback?
Number 3.
So we're going with quarterback at number 3, as you may have noticed, but I want to come back here into the conversation. Josh actually asks this. He said, wouldn't Cousins be behind Wormley as well? Is it someone else? No, so I just didn't want in the graphic to have to put a guy on there twice. That's it. Like, he is the backup. That's what I'm saying. He is the primary backup to the center and the right guard as of now. So that's a pretty important position. You've got 2 veterans that you need to take some reps off of so that in big games they're healthy and fresh. So he's going to have to play a lot this year. And as impressive as he is and as optimistic as we are about that, he is a true freshman. So when things are thrown at him for the first time, he may struggle with it once or twice. What has been impressive about Cooper Cousins is he has overcome those things and he's worked through those problems so far pretty efficiently. But we heard during camp, James Franklin said he was doing really well until it got complex and they started throwing some blitzes and some run stunts at him. And then his head was a little bit underwater. Well, apparently he's a good swimmer because his head usually gets back above water. But what happens when it's for real? And you don't have those, okay, you missed it. Here's what you needed to know, blah, blah, blah. It all counts later. So he is a very important depth part for sure. This from Rob Sherrill. He says, love the Kraft interview. He's a firecracker. That's exactly what the program needs. Again, you can go check out his full interview at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com or here on the YouTube page. But hang on. We're going to be talking about it in just a little bit with Greg. Okay, let's reset. For real, though, here's number 3.
Number 3.
So we're going with the quarterbacks. We're going to get into the good and the bad, which really equals out to number 3 on the list. Drew Allar was better than you thought he was, and he's not as good as people who have those insulated, you cannot criticize the quarterback view of the situation, which I don't think there are many people at this point. But like, let's have an honest look at Drew Allar. And let's start with the bad, because I want to end on a good note. I want to talk about the positive. So here are the things he struggled with last year that when you look at, you can't ignore. 8-yard average depth of target. That was 19th among qualifying Big Ten quarterbacks when you throw in the Pac-12 teams, right? So in the expanded universe now of the Big Ten, he would have been almost dead last. That is a function of the offense and how they play, but that's also on him for missing some of those big plays and for not taking advantage of some aggressive throws that were there, but he passed up. Another one that's kind of in the gray area here, 24 throwaways, where that was most of Big Ten quarterbacks, tied for 5th most nationally. So there's nothing that offense last year loved more than to kill a play. Again, it's not his fault that there were a lot of dead plays, but I watched Caleb Williams this offseason. I'm not trying to say like he has to be Caleb Williams, but there is a style of quarterback that when the play stinks, either it just wasn't a good concept or the defense countered it perfectly, he was able to make stuff happen anyway. Allar even talked about this offseason when he was here on the show. What is an elite quarterback to him? It's like you take care of all the things you can so that the easy stuff is easy. I'm paraphrasing here. And then when the play breaks down, make a play. Making a play off script, off schedule, not letting the defense outright win a rep, essentially. And so he needs to get better at that particular part of this. Okay, so then let's get into the accuracy stuff. 36% adjusted completion percentage on passes over 20 yards. So essentially, he was inaccurate on deep balls. That was 10th of 17 Big Ten quarterbacks. And then just above 50%, 53% adjusted completion percentage under pressure. He didn't make big mistakes, but he was not accurate under pressure. We all saw that. Part of that is the pressure being in his face and being immediate. You know, there was a stunt last year that everybody used, and it was a cheat code against that offense where you got pressure through the A gap. Like, congratulations, you pulled the slot machine and you won $1 million. So he needs to be better in those situations. But he was not bad. He was not a bad quarterback. So there's going to be some PFF grading here. If you can stomach that, it's just a shortcut when we're having this conversation on the show, so we don't have to go through all the minutia and all the data. His pressure to sack ratio, which is how often he gets pressure and how much he gives up sacks, second lowest in the Big Ten. He only, despite the fact that he wasn't great at drifting into pressure, only 12 pressures credited directly to Allar, according to PFF. That was fifth lowest among Big Ten quarterbacks when you factor in the percentage of his total pressures. They threw the ball a lot. He did not make as many of those mistakes as it seemed. And this is something where I had to go and correct myself in the data because it felt like, oh, here's another situation where Allar drifts into pressure. And I think part of it was a lot of critical downs, a lot of third downs where that was happening. So it felt like it was a higher percentage of his plays, but it was not as many as it would seem. So then rip through the final two here. And we all know about this one, the 1% turnover-worthy play rate, 1.1%, which means it's not just that he didn't throw interceptions. He didn't give the defense the opportunity to catch an interception. He didn't throw a lot of bad balls that were dropped, or just his decision-making was sound from a safety perspective. And then a PFF passing grade of 80, which was second highest in the conference behind J.J. McCarthy. So, he was a good quarterback. That was a good starting baseline from him. So the question is, a 5-star quarterback, how does he get better? How does he improve to the point that he is then winning you some games or putting you in a position where your team can win some games because he's providing enough of not just good, not just baseline, but a couple difference-making throws, a couple great decisions that don't just avoid a negative, but get you a positive, even if it isn't a touchdown, even if it isn't a superstar play. I've talked a lot about his ability to read a defense and attack the structural weakness of it within the structure of his offensive play. So going from the first progression when it's not open to the second progression. I've covered that a whole lot. I'm hoping here in the next couple of weeks or so, Landon Tangwell and I are going to get together and we're going to do some All-22. I want to show some of that where it's not just me telling you. You can see his eyes go from here, it's not open, come over here on 3rd and 15, and he hits a target. Who drops the football? There's a lot of Allar was very good, and the situation didn't reward him last year. Now, he's a humble kid. So I brought that up directly to him, and he talked about all the areas in that in which he needs to improve from a timing and rhythm perspective. Andy Kotelnicki's offense is built around timing and rhythm throws in a lot of ways, where these are one-read throws, or these are throws that are designed to help the quarterback make quick decisions by reading just an element of the defense. So if you get him in rhythm, he's confident. And Nate Bauer did an awesome job. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. He talked to Drew Allar. He got a lot of really interesting and insightful answers out of Drew about how his mind works. And again, I'm going to stress, go to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, 2 months for $1, using code PSU1. It's absolutely essential that you understand these things for the upcoming season, because a lot of what we're talking about, the positivity, is built around this concept of getting Allar comfortable in the offense. Is it a fatal flaw of his that can never be overcome? Or can Penn State give him a more positive environment than it was last year? And the way I phrase it in the article is, Penn State in a lot of ways asked Drew Allar to be Peyton Manning on 3rd down. Like that, hey, you're the 5-star quarterback. Go be great. Go fix all the things that went wrong on 1st and 2nd down. They ran the ball, and this is going to come up a whole lot here. They ran the ball 66% of the time on 1st down. So when it's 3rd and 7, because everyone knew what you were doing on the first 2 downs, then Drew has to throw the football. I remember I think it was the Ohio State game. They deferred throwing the football till 3rd down and the 3rd and 4th quarter when they were forced into aggression. That is not the situation to put in a quarterback to succeed who's talking this offseason about rhythm and comfort. And we go through step by step how you fix that root issue, everything's fixed. Fixing the root issue, obviously, is probably the biggest if for the Penn State offense this year, but it's important. So that's Drew Allar. That is number 3. There's so much more I want to talk about, but there is stuff that I have to keep behind the paywall, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Here's the thing. I really would like for you to go read that article. It's one of the ones I'm more proud of this offseason because I tried to take every single thought I've had about Drew Allar and put it in a cohesive fashion that makes sense and nutshell it all down into one conversation. Was that conversation 1,100 words? Maybe it was more than that. But I think it's worth your time. I personally think it's worth your time. So please go read that because I enjoyed writing it. I enjoyed putting it together. And again, shout out to Nate, who did a great job of getting some of those quotes to really lock it all in and express exactly what Penn State needs to do and what Allar needs to do to take a step this year. So to recap this, not as bad as you wanted to say he was last year. Still has problems. Give him some help from a scheme perspective and from an offensive cohesion perspective. Make him part of the offense, not just the third down savior. Things should get better, but there's always the should. These are the optimistic viewpoint of it's July and I've slept 8 hours every night this week. So that's where it's the rosy side of the coin. So now we're getting into the top 2, which everyone knew what was coming with the top 2 positions. But here we go. Here's number 2.
Number 2.
It's the tight ends. I don't know if it can be anything other than the tight ends at this point. But it is interesting because so here are the criteria that I'm looking for from these positions and why, honestly, it's kind of unfair to the receivers and especially the offensive line that they're 5-4 because the receivers need 3 starters, not 2. They need 3 for this offense to be what it needs to be. They can get away with 2 and be okay, but they need 3 solid receivers. And so you have to fill 3 positions. Quarterback needs 1. Tight end technically needs 1. Running back needs 1. So running back, tight end, their number, like the 3 through 1 are just, hey, do you have one guy we feel comfortable about? Yeah, you do. All right, then you're going to go there. Tight end, though, has a little bit less proven depth. So do you have high-quality starters that can be superstars, 2 and 1? Do you have the depth necessary to fill out the roster so we feel this position is resilient? Tight end is quite resilient from a perspective. So they have some superstars. Here's Tyler Warren. Maybe he hasn't reached his full potential all at once. He hasn't been the number 1 receiver in the offense for really schemed up and given him the opportunity. Because once again, we'll talk about the other offense in just a second. But here's what the high-level stuff. His run blocking grade from PFF, again, a shortcut here, is the highest of any of Penn State's big 3 tight ends over the last 3 seasons. It's better than Bretton Strange. Now, that lacks context that Bretton Strange was asked to do harder things, and Tyler Warren has generally feasted on lower-level competition. And when it comes to the playing comparable, I hate to always go back to this, but let's not use that. Illinois was a really good front 7. Did he dominate in the Illinois game? He did not. Did he dominate against Delaware? You bet he did. Did he dominate against Maryland? Yeah, pretty much. So there's that last threshold of he needs to be a better run blocker, but he has shown more consistency than Theo Johnson as that lead blocker tight end. I expect him to be the Y tight end this year. That is the inline tight end, the guy who lines up next to the tackle and blocks defensive ends. So he has a better profile to do it than Theo Johnson. He's more physical, I think, despite not being the same size or having the same length. He does have more of those Pat Freiermuth and Bretton Strange characteristics. And as a receiver, just to throw this up again, as a contested catch receiver, catching 2/3 of your contested catches is nuts. So this is a really good football player who has the ability to be a dominant player as both a run blocker and as a pass catcher. So that's why they're number 2. But is he a complete tight end? One of the biggest things, he has some drop issues in his career, which, again, you can go read in the article. That's a really important thing for him to clean up this year, because if he's going to be a dominant figure in this offense, if it's Trey Wallace and then Tyler Warren is number 2 as the receivers, he's got to be a little more reliable in that area. And it's just, it's percentages. It's what's an acceptable level of this and what is unacceptable. He's just north of what I'm comfortable with seeing historically, what a drop rate is for a major pass catcher. And then you look at the depth. So you have Khalil Dinkins entering his 3rd year. That's a really positive sign in a very talented room. Andrew Rappelier, a redshirt freshman, on that Anthony Donko trajectory of runaway optimism. He's going to have some rough moments. He may not be the starter. He might not take over the way that I think a lot of people think he's going to. But those 3 players have distinct and unique skill sets. So Khalil Dinkins is virtually a wide receiver. He is a big wide receiver in a lot of ways. His route running skills are the best from a ability perspective that we've seen at Penn State in quite some time, probably since Mike Gesicki. As a pure receiver, let's not get it twisted. He's going to be the best receiver from a production and talent standpoint, but his ability to run and cut and get open and separate and run with speed, all of those things, kind of run a full route tree. There haven't been many guys that can do it exactly like that, to mimic a receiver. Is he big enough to block? That's what he's got to prove in camp. Andrew Rappelier is a really good receiving threat, but he is not Khalil Dinkins from the movement perspective. He's just a step behind that. So can he make up that difference and provide the run support? Because these guys need to be able to run, to be able to block. One of the reasons Penn State didn't run outside last year, and this comes up in the comments all the time. One of the reasons Penn State did not run outside last year, they didn't do any pulling schemes, is because the tight ends could not block on the edge. They could not seal for the offensive tackle or the guard or the center, whoever was pulling into the flat, to allow them into the flat. The play would get strung out. Now you're running laterally instead of kind of getting upfield. You know, you're on that arc projection. You're now running flat. That led to tackles for loss and for an offense playing to its defense with methodical, Iowa-level, fanatical commitment to running the football. That was unacceptable, so they had to cut it out of the offense. So these tight ends have to block. That's what I'm saying. They have to be able to get those pin blocks in pin and pull or in power. However, they're going to be doing those things to get onto the edges of the tackle box. That's the biggest thing for them this year. And then everything in the passing game can be schemed up for them, and they can get open because they have the talent to do it. But the depth here, I didn't even get into Luke Reynolds or Jerry Cross or Joey Schlaffer, any of those guys, because the top 3 that we expect to be major parts of this offense are both diverse in their skill sets, and they have quality abilities that should result in a positive outcome. You have the highest likelihood here of that happening. Speaking of highest likelihood of a positive outcome, here on the show, Greg Pickel's here from Indianapolis. Greg, thank you for coming on the show. Thanks for jumping in on a very, very, very busy day for you. So first off, can you set the scene for us? What are things like as you're getting started this morning in Indianapolis for Big Ten Media Day Part 2?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good morning, T. Frank. Well, first of all, what you see behind me is not what you will see on the Big Ten Network later today. This is the sort of overflow workroom where there is no music. Currently out on the field at Lucas Oil Stadium, the home of the Indianapolis Colts. They have some music playing and some people are getting ready to talk, so I jumped back here. But the scene is set. It's actually a little bit different this year. It's a bigger stage for a bigger Big Ten, so they moved that from the corner of Lucas Oil Stadium to pretty much the entirety of one end zone. Obviously, you have all the new logos, new teams, things of that nature here. The new broadcast partners, CBS, Fox, obviously Fox has been around, but CBS and NBC, they are all here as well. So it's going to be a busy day. We have some newcomers here with USC and UCLA. Also on the docket today, James Franklin, of course, and some players will talk later this morning and this afternoon, and we'll bring it all to you here at Blue White Illustrated.
Yeah, how's the volume been, I guess, from having so many more teams represented in the Big Ten? Is it different than previous years? Is there something that you can point to kind of on a surface level of, oh, wow, the new Big Ten is very different than it was in years past?
Yeah, I think this time of day, no, not really. I think that once you see the crowd of reporters that are here on Big Ten Network when they go live on the air at 11 o'clock, but then even more so once the coaches start talking at 11:30, and then James Franklin concludes that group at 12:45, you'll see a bigger presence. There's more tables here for media than there were a year ago, so that tells you, I think, all you need to know about the added presence with added teams, which makes sense, of course. But outside of the jerseys and everything, no, there's not and new logos and things like that. There's not a huge difference quite yet, but it is early in the morning. We got down here pretty much to do this and to avoid traffic, so we made sure we did that. We're some of the earliest people here, but yeah, all told, it is pretty much the same, but I think it'll start feeling different once you start hearing from UCLA and you start hearing from USC, and Lincoln Riley is standing in Indianapolis having those conversations.
Are you planning on talking to any of those coaches, or going over and hearing anything from them in terms of what you're doing today? Because I know, like, you follow Penn State, and there's a lot of things we need to get to there, but do you have a curiosity about that?
A little bit. I'll be curious to see what both Lincoln Riley has to say at the podium, and also Deshaun Foster, the head coach at UCLA. Let's not forget Penn State, or there are Penn State alums on both of those staffs. Brian Norwood is still at UCLA, and DeAnton Lynn is the defensive coordinator now, moving across town from UCLA to join Lincoln Riley's USC staff. So that's actually one angle I'm curious to explore a little bit, how that came to be. Obviously, I wouldn't expect Lincoln Riley to have any interest in talking about what Lynn's time at Penn State was like, or anything along those lines. But I do think, at least from my perspective, and I'm hoping some Penn State fans as well, you can let us know in the comments or over inside the Lions Den message board whether you care or not. But that is the one angle that piques my interest, aside from just hearing that, look, they're going to get the same questions anybody would expect, right? About being here for the first time, about entering the Big Ten, going to new Big Ten stadiums, all of that stuff. So I think it's a little bit of a different angle that is unique to Penn State and its fans. So like I said, if you're not interested, let us know in the comments, and I will just skip that part of my day. But that's on the docket for now.
Greg has no problem not going and talking to people that are not part of the core thing he needs to do, which is cover Penn State and their comments and their thoughts, because it's a big year for the Nittany Lions with some opportunity, which is, I don't need to say it again, of the opportunity that could happen in 2024. And a lot of that starts today with the posturing and the optimism and the positivity here at Big Ten Media Day. So can you go through, just give us a quick rundown of when Penn State fans should tune in to hear from their players and their coach?
Yeah, so if you're watching on the Big Ten Network, of course, we're going to have the video of everything here in Indianapolis right here on the YouTube channel. If you're listening to the podcast version of this, go over to the YouTube channel. You're going to be able to see all of that there. But if you want to watch it live, not on replay, the Big Ten Network, of course, owns the rights to all of this stuff live, so we will not be bringing it to you live. We can do that in Word version or format, if you will, which we will do over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. But James Franklin is the final head coach to hit the podium, which is on BTN Live today. That's at 12:45 Eastern Time. Shortly after that, Devon J. Thomas, formerly Devon Ellies, who will find out why that name change was something he wanted to do this year, is going to be available with Jalen Reed and Tyler Warren from 1:15 to 1:45. That's in more of a roundtable off TV setting. And then the same thing for James Franklin, 3:30 to 4:15. He will be at a roundtable with reporters as well. So like I said, we'll have video stories of all that stuff here on the YouTube channel and over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. But yeah, it's interesting. I was just talking to a few other people who cover Penn State, and most years when we come out here, there's a lot of overlap between when Penn State goes and when it doesn't. I assume the fact that there's only 6 teams here today instead of the usual 7 is probably part of that. But we'll be able to get to everything in sort of a nice chronological order today. So look forward to bringing everybody that, and certainly there will be plenty to talk about.
That's always nice when you don't have to make decisions or have to run from one thing to the other, when it all flows well. So we'll be excited to hear what you gather from that. And again, a huge thank you to Greg for being out there and for getting all these things for us here on the YouTube channel and at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. I guess the last thing from my perspective, if anybody has questions for Greg in the chat, you can throw them in there. He's here. He's going to be talking to some important people. Maybe you can put a bug in his ear about what you want to ask about. And game day coaching, I'm assuming, is not going to be a part of the conversation, which is the number one thing everyone asks about. But let's talk about Pat Kraft and what happened last night. You spoke with him for roughly 30 minutes, about 27 minutes of pure Pat Kraft fire. Everyone seems to have a very positive opinion of Penn State's athletic director. So what did you take away from that conversation with the top guy in charge of a lot of important things, not just with football, but renovations across the athletic department? What were the major takeaways from what you got from him yesterday?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note first that this was Pat's first full group media interview of the year, but he also, of course, talked to Nate Bauer, and you were a part of that as well here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. We have the transcript up for subscribers from earlier this summer over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. So if you watch that video and you watch the one that we put up yesterday, you would probably say they were very similar, right? I mean, Pat Kraft is always full of energy. He's full of excitement. He believes in Penn State. He believes in what the plan is for Penn State from not just a football perspective, but from all sports perspectives. That's easy for me to say moving forward. So very energetic. He talked about the whiteout and the fact they went with Washington. It became, again, I think we've covered this enough and probably ad nauseum, but for those that maybe didn't catch the many other times we've talked about that, Penn State is set on having the whiteout at night for obvious reasons, the fireworks, the fired up crowd, so on and so forth. And the Washington game looked like their best chance to have a marquee, if you will, night game. And whether you can argue that Illinois or Washington, it really, are they the same level opponent? Are they not? The thing I keep coming back to when I talk to people about that is Washington's new to the conference. They're coming off of a CFP appearance. I know it's not the same team. It's not even the same coach, of course. I get all of that.
Yeah.
But I do think the excitement level of just seeing somebody new, combined with where Penn State very well and should be from a record perspective and from a postseason outlook perspective at that point in time, made it the right pick. And he didn't get into those things. That's me just sort of shooting off the cuff here. But, he talked about just kind of how difficult it's become with not difficult, but there's a lot of moving parts with the TV networks and where they want to put their best games and what other obligations they have outside of their one to the Big Ten. So, he said that, I guess the big takeaway was he said that he feels like there's a pretty good process in place now to make that a smoother decision-making process. Penn State does not want to be making that announcement July 15. And I know that fans, and there are a lot of people internally at Penn State that really frustrated. And Pat Kraft, I think, and James Franklin are at the top of that list. So, if there's any takeaway beyond the obvious, I would say that without question, Penn State plans to, or at least hopes to, in conjunction with the Big Ten and its TV partners, have a plan in place to not have that happen again next year. We talked about Beaver Stadium and some of the things we reported on, both long-term and short-term. The short-term stuff in terms of concourse widening, ribbon boards, the new video board, things like that. I didn't get the impression you'll see some of it for the Bowling Green game. They're eyeing Illinois homecoming later in September for a lot of that stuff to be done. Some of it probably isn't going to be done until maybe the whiteout game. And so I think that, you'll see that stuff gradually happen throughout the home slate. So you may go to one game and see X, and you may come back for the next home game and see Y. So took that as well. He answered the critics, too, the question why Penn State needed to spend $700 million on Beaver Stadium renovations. And he basically said it, I'm going to paraphrase here, but, the question just kind of becomes, what else would you like us to do to some extent? I mean, that's not the words he used, but they had to, some of these things they had to do from just a structural and safety perspective. Some of these things they needed to do from a making more money off of the building perspective. And there's only so many avenues to do it, T. Frank. And guess what? They all cost a lot of money. So that was sort of the message there. And then he just talked about some other things.
I was just going to jump in here of the conversations we've had, talking to him in that interview from June. This was the cost-effective measure, $700 million. When you're doing massive construction, infrastructure construction, there is no $1,000 option. It's $1,000 for one I-beam. So when you're making these decisions, you're in the $100 million to $1 billion range, and however all of it shakes out, from Nate has talked about this ad nauseum in a lot of ways, building a new stadium or doing anything at all would have been in the $2 billion range. So again, when you look at the two different numbers, it does seem more reasonable when you've got $700 million instead of $2 to $2.5 billion.
Yeah, and I know somebody out there is probably going to say that, well, this project will end up costing more. And T. Frank, if I cut you off. Yeah, I'm sorry if I cut you off. The internet's a little laggy back here. So I may have cut you off. I may not have. I'm not sure.
You're good.
But ultimately, there's some out there that will say, well, this will end up costing more than the number that's on it right now. And it probably will. But the same can be said for whatever number you would have put on a rebuild or a completely new stadium at Penn State.
Yeah. So before I cut you off, you were talking about the final thing he discussed yesterday or one of the final things you wanted to talk about from the conversation last night.
Yeah, I mean, I think just some of the other takeaways is that he's very bullish on how Penn State will be able to capitalize on whatever comes out of the House settlement, the NCAA versus House case that, sorry, having a little bit of internet issues here, but that will come out, that's supposed to be finalized this week that will allow schools to spend up to maybe $22 million or some kind of a cap that will help bring NIL in-house to some degree, as Nate has talked about at length. So he's very positive about Penn State's ability to capitalize on that. We'll see. We've talked a lot about how Penn State, and this is whether you're hearing it from us, you're hearing it from people within the university or the athletic department or whatever, that Penn State was behind in this game when NIL first started, and to some degree it still is, despite there being signs that progress has been made. So it all sounds good that they have a plan in place to capitalize on this, but it'll be about doing it. And I think the proof will ultimately be in the pudding about whether or not what Pat Kraft kind of proposed yesterday and put out there is really, truly ready to come to not just reality, but a sustained reality once all this stuff gets into place.
So, again, we'll be following all of that stuff, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for more information. Greg, do you want to stick around for the end of the show, or do you got to get going?
Oh, I got a few more minutes. Yeah, that's no problem at all.
All right, so I know you weren't here for the full thing, so we're going to recap. This was a perfect tone setter because we got through 5 through 2 in our power ranking of the Penn State offense. So for everyone's recap, here's what we had. Number 5 were the wide receivers. No one's surprised by that. Coming in at number 4, it's the offensive line. The offensive line coming in at number 4. Number 3, we have the quarterbacks. They are right in the middle of our breakdown. Very polarizing position no matter where you put them, I think. Number 2, the Penn State tight ends, which leaves number 1, Greg.
Number 1.
It's the Penn State coach. I didn't even have a joke ready for that. It's the running backs. The running backs are number 1, Greg. So first off, any qualms you have with 5 through 1? What would your rankings be?
No, I think you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, I think that the way Penn State's season will ultimately go, I mean, look, number 5 is obvious, right? I don't think there's any question about that. I depending on where you rank Tyler Warren compared to what is behind him, compared to what the offensive line comes back, you could maybe flip-flop those. And I don't know if you would get a whole lot of argument, but no, I think you have the list pretty much spot on. The same thing with, could you move 1 through 4 around or 2 through 4 around in any different order? Yeah, I would, I'd be fine with it either way, but I think you got the right group at the top. One that, I think there's been a lot of chatter this offseason, T. Frank, from a variety of places about the Penn State running backs. We had this in part of our Blue White Illustrated preseason magazine cover story that they feel like they're being disrespected. They don't feel like they're getting enough attention. I will be very, very curious to see what the conversation is like between James Franklin and people who do not cover Penn State. Because I do think, and you and I have talked about this before, that sometimes when we're in our own bubble, we don't always get the sense of the way everybody else that covers or follows this league feels about certain things. Yeah. And I know that from a national perspective, they don't feel like they're getting enough attention. There's a lot of national reporters here. I just saw Pete Thamel walk through this room I'm sitting in a second ago from ESPN. Steve Wilfong was wandering around. Andy Staples from On 3. So, they're all here. But, from a just Big Ten school-to-school perspective, I'll be curious to find out what those conversations are like, how those two are viewed by some of the people who vote on a variety of Big Ten awards, postseason, preseason, things like that.
Yeah, so that is part of what I got into, and nobody was immune from criticism last year on the Penn State offense. Every single position. There's even crazy people that said that Olu Fashanu isn't very good because he had a bad game against Ohio State. the running backs improved in very specific areas last year while also not being so good that they could overcome the issues of the offense. From a film perspective, when they're playing against 8 in the box all the time, and even if there's not 8 in the box, the extra safety drops down immediately and meets them 4 yards off the line of scrimmage instead of 7. They had some issues with that, and they also, when they did have their opportunities to make big plays, they didn't break that final tackle to get an explosive play. But at the same time, they were really good in more subtle areas. But Greg, I just filtered through, and I'll throw this up here. Katron Allen, from a grading perspective at PFF, was elite last year. He had a 90 overall rushing grade. So when he had the ball in his hands, he created elite plays. And he led the team with 273 explosive yards, which is, for a guy whose thing is getting yards but maybe not having that final gear, to lead the team with explosive yardage and produce it in a situation where everyone knew they were going to run the football. He had a very underrated year. But here's the problem, Greg. If you go, what I did was I went into some data sets and I said, okay, let's take all of those elite running backs from the Power 5 with a certain number of yards, or excuse me, a certain number of touches. And then you filter it by what their grade was versus how many yards they had. So he had 899 yards last year. Everyone else in the top 10 had over 1,100. He had 6 touchdowns. The next closest was 8. Everyone else had 10 plus. So you mentioned national media. Unless you're putting up fancy stats, national media are not paying attention to you because it makes sense. They can't watch every single game every single week to see what's really going on. A lot of times we all rely on box scores for postseason awards. So when you go to box scores for preseason awards, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen are being slept on, despite the fact that Katron Allen genuinely had an elite year aside from the stats. What was your assessment of their play last year? I guess, where did you land on some of these things?
Yeah, I think that you kind of made a perfect point there, is that if you looked at the box score, you wouldn't be, in a lot of cases, not every case, but a lot of cases, you wouldn't be overly stunned or maybe impressed by the work of those guys. If you go beyond the box score, you would be, and I think that's where this divide comes between people who cover and follow this team closely and those that don't, for whatever reason, have the opportunity to or choose not to or what have you. And it's why I think these guys don't necessarily get viewed in the same light as some other the top running back tandems around the country because, again, there were some games where the box score lit up, but there weren't a ton of them. It was kind of more volume than anything else that led to their final season. I agree with you. There were some chances to make plays that didn't happen. The offense, at so many instances, of course, was dysfunctional, and that just led to stat reductions across the board. So, Katron Allen told me a few weeks ago that he feels like this is a statement year for him. I don't disagree, and I think Nick Singleton probably feels the same way if given the chance to ask him that question. So, how does Andy Kotelnicki and this offense make that a reality? We'll find out here soon enough. And
Rob,
yeah.
So I was going to say, Rob says in the chat, if you're in a rotation, that affects your stats. And yet, Singleton had 1,000 yards his freshman season in a rotation. So it can, but I also think that is not necessarily, if you have a timeshare, then you don't get good stats. Because but in certain situations when the offense is dysfunctional, Katron Allen had 9 carries. Might have had 6 carries and 9 plays against Ohio State because the offense barely had the football. They went 3 and out a whole lot. And then the way they were rotating by series, he saw less action. So in the biggest game in a spotlight, the rotation can absolutely hurt you. But at the same time, it can also benefit you if you're fresh and you're getting those explosive plays. One other thing I want to get to here, Greg, because Nick Singleton, I think, is the one who bore the brunt of criticism last year because he was not the same guy from a stat perspective. The drastic decrease in his number of big plays and what he brought to the offense. And whenever we have somebody that is thought of very highly and then they don't perform well, there is a certain reactionary to, of course you were overrated. We spent so much time talking about you. You blah, 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 blah.
You talking about the Christian Hackenberg, Drew Allar thing? Is that kind
Pretty
of where
much.
You're going with this?
Yeah. But here is where...
Not
and
fair
I
to Allar at this point, obviously, but it doesn't change how people are looking at it at this point.
Right, so next Saquon Barkley, then he doesn't have a Saquon Barkley year, and it's fraud. Well, no. Maybe he's not Saquon Barkley, but he's still a good football player. And he was a very raw runner that we know he was a very raw runner who had a good opportunity his freshman season to take advantage of his skill sets. But when he had to be a better football player last year, because again, I mentioned this early in the show, they ran the ball 66% of the time on first down. Everyone knew what was coming. So you have to be better at your position. And I saw from a film perspective, his eyes were better, his decision-making was better, but he did kind of paint by numbers of, this is where I'm supposed to go, so this is where I'm going, instead of deciding to be special every once in a while. And I just want to show this where we talk a lot about the explosive plays. I get into the numbers of the difference, the number of plays and the number of yards in the article. But here is one thing that I wanted to share that I thought was interesting. On non-explosive runs over the past 2 seasons, this is what Singleton did in 22 and 23. So 2022, all of his yards are on big explosive plays. He averages 3 yards a carry on those standard runs. 2023, he's at 3.6. Now, that's not a massive jump, but if you then fold in, Greg, this year, a return to maybe not the same as 22, but a fraction of 2022, suddenly that average of 4.4 yards per carry that he had last year becomes 6.8 or whatever. So he did get better on a down-to-down consistency where you could depend on him to get 3.5 yards in a bad situation. So that part of his game improved, but the situation was not conducive for him to get those big plays, which is partially on him for breaking tackles and being special in certain situations. But overall, there was an improvement from what he did, at least from what I see on the film. Any thoughts on where he goes this year and the next step for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the thing I keep thinking of as you keep talking and as we have this conversation is very simply, if those two do have those special moments this year, if they do play the way that maybe everyone thought they would last year that didn't necessarily come to reality in some respects, everyone will tell you, yeah, see, I knew that guy was special. I knew Kaytron Allen was the man. I knew Nick Singleton was the man. And we can sit here and say, that really wasn't the case. But I think both of them have every opportunity to be in that conversation of being the guy. Obviously, the duo at Ohio State is getting all of the credit and the talk and the hype right now, and rightly so. They're terrific.
Yeah.
But these two are, have the opportunity, if they take advantage of it, and if this offense works better, to be in the same conversation as those two. So I'll leave you with that. I'm going to get out on the floor here, T. Frank, but obviously a lot more to come today, and we'll see what we learn from Indy, and I guarantee those two guys will be a part of the conversation during the time here.
Greg, thank you for your time. That's it for the show today. We will be back tomorrow. I believe we'll be at full strength with both Ryan Snyder and Sean Fitz here on the BWI Live Recruiting Show, heading into the Lash Bash, the final opportunity for recruiting in the summer of 2024. We'll be back with that. We'll talk to you later.